You're listening to Secret Sonics, a podcast exploring the creative side of music production. Welcome back to Secret Sonics. I am your host, Ben Wallach. My guest today is Freddie Fabian. Freddie grew up in the UK, immigrating to Israel at the age of 15. He started playing violin at the age of 4 and began studying piano and music theory at the age of 5. With a strong background in classical piano, he soon went on to study at a musical conservatory. His love for uplifting trance, tech house, deep house, and progressive house eventually led him to study music production, orchestration, and engineering at BPM, a music school in Tel Aviv. In his words, I have a critical ear when it comes to production. I like to ensure that every fader move I make is going to be something complementary and constructive towards the project. Today, Freddie is working with all kinds of local acts as a music producer and mixing engineer. His clientele includes Laser Lloyd and Ariella Zeitlin and many more. Freddie approached me with some of his music, and I was really impressed with his ability to craft a song. So I'm psyched to have him on the podcast. Welcome to the podcast, Freddie.
Hi there. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man, for sure. Thanks for reaching out to me. So tell me a bit about how you got started getting involved in music production.
So it began literally when I was listening to a lot of stuff on the radio in the UK when I was much younger. That's when like trance was becoming slightly more mainstream, when it was first kind of kicking off in like the 2000s sort of area. And I was very, very in touch with that sort of music, and I liked it very much. I had no idea how to produce it, though, and I really wanted to understand the back end of how these things came about, because I was brought up mostly on classical music and some jazz and big band, that sort of music, mostly acoustic stuff. So I had very little understanding of how people were creating electronic music. And as far as computers were involved, I didn't have any concept of how that could be when it came to music making. So initially, I ended up getting some free software from a serial packet, like I think many people have in the past, which is kind of cute.
From a serial packet?
From a serial packet, yeah. So I think the software was called EJ, and they had a few of them in the series. It's like basic sequencing program. It doesn't give you much flexibility as far as mixing and signal routing goes, but at the same time, it was like a host sequencer which let you drop blocks of audio, and it would play loops, and you could basically create an arrangement in a project window, similar to like Cubase and Ableton. The timeline would run, and it would play the song or play the loops that you'd put in, and you had basic controls like volume and some EQ and a couple of cute little plugins and stuff. But like I didn't really understand what I was doing, but I got to grips with the fact that you could lay out loops in a host sequencer, have it play, and you could create a song out of it. So that was like my first insight as into like computer music, as it were, because I couldn't export it at the time as an MP3 because I didn't really understand how to do that. I actually recorded it a line out from my computer into a tape machine, and I have a recording of my first ever loop-based production on cassette somewhere, buried in my room somewhere.
That's amazing. A former guest on the show, Mo Ackerman, told me a very similar story about how he got started and how he couldn't actually bounce the file from a sequencer he was using, so he literally took like an 1/8 inch out.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That was the only thing I knew how to do, because like I've been doing live sound for quite a while up until that point, because as a keyboardist, playing at events and stuff like that, I was pretty confident with the recording and live sound sort of management situation. But like again, after that short phase of like playing around with the computer music, I dropped it again because the classical piano and theory really was taking precedence over everything else at the time, because that was the emphasis of my musical study at the time. So I played around with it for a couple of years, and then I just put it back on hold, and then didn't really go back to it until it was brought to my attention that there was actually production software called Cubase, which far exceeded the abilities of EJ.
Amazing.
And that's when I got and then I got my first copy of Cubase LE5 and an audio interface. After doing some research and some Googling, I got to grips with the very, very, very raw basics of a setup with a laptop software and audio interface. And then from there on, that's when I decided that I was going to take this really seriously, because I wanted to be able to do whatever I wanted to do in terms of music, without the limitations. So like After that, I mean, going to music school really helped because that was I studied the software quite intensively for like about 3 years, and armed with the knowledge that I could siphon out of my teachers because I drove them crazy, because I'm the kind of person who wants to know how every single thing works in the software. I think that the only limitation now really is my brain. And not
That's amazing.
And not what I can do in the software.
So you know Cubase inside and out.
I wouldn't say I'm a guru, but I'm very confident with the program right now. And if I can't,
so if I ever want to switch to Cubase from Logic, I'll be in touch with you.
Oh, but the thing is, I would never bash Logic because I actually love Logic. It's such a user-friendly interface when you see it for the first time. Cubase is a bit of a savage dog when you see it.
So is Pro Tools, by the way.
Yeah, I only had very brief exposure to Pro Tools. I mean, I don't really have a problem with any of the sequencing programs, to be honest, or any of the recording softwares, because since I've had a bit of exposure to all of them, including Ableton as well, I did a whole semester in Ableton. I just like using Cubase because it's the one that I studied the most and the one I feel the most comfortable using. I think everyone is the same, you know. Some people like.
Yeah, I recommend sticking with your guns, like whatever is most comfortable for you. Just keep going with it.
I know some people have moved over to other, you know, DAWs, but for me, it's always been Cubase, and I'm quite happy using it, and it's definitely yielding results for me. So, you know, I'm sticking with it. But I would never bash anyone who's using anything else because, you know, I totally dig Logic. Just FYI.
Amazing. Awesome. So was there a song or album in particular that opened your mind to the possibilities of what you could do with music production?
A friend of mine, he showed me once that he had basically performed and recorded some orchestral type music using, you know, pianos from Ivory and strings from one of the string plugin libraries. And I've never heard of a thing called the sampled library. I had no idea that there was such a thing as sampled libraries that existed. And he showed me a piece of music that he'd written, like a simple one. It was piano and cello. I was really impressed. I mean, I could hear that there was imperfections as far as dynamics and articulations go because it didn't quite match up to what a human would probably sound like. But at the same time, the sample sounds were obviously real, and that's what convinced me that it was real. And I was like, how'd you do that? And he's like, well, I did it in Cubase using Contact and some sample libraries. And then once I got the bug for like, you can actually do that inside of, you know, Cubase, I thought, well, that shouldn't leave me with any limitations to what I can do, because I've got loads of ideas like that. I just didn't have the tools to, you know, materialize them.
Amazing. So you kind of had this eye-opening experience when your friend played you that song.
That was definitely one thing, because up until that point, I was very unaware that that you could do these things. Like even after I knew about Cubase and that you could record inside a host DAW, etc., I didn't know that there were things called sample libraries, and there are some pretty remarkable ones that exist. And even like 10 years ago, when I first started getting like interested in this sort of thing, you know, mildly, then I didn't have really any concept of how advanced they really can get.
Wow, it's amazing. So tell me a little bit, let's jump into your workflow. What do you look for in an artist when you're trying to see if it will be a good fit working together?
Generally speaking, when I sit down with an artist, the first thing I like to do is just literally just like sit down and have a cup of tea and like just chill with them to find out what direction they want to go in as far as their music goes. And I'm saying everyone that I meet is obviously a very different personality, and you kind of have to just be very open-minded and completely non-judgmental to start with anyone that you deal with, because you don't know what they're like. You don't know where they've come from or what meaning or emotion there might be behind their concept of what they're trying to bring to fruition. So your job as a producer, what I try to do is I try to establish just a good vibe with the artist that I might be working with. It might just be a general conversation about, you know, music and stuff in general. It might not be anything too specific regarding the project, but at the end of the day, it's to try and communicate with them in a way that we both have a good mutual understanding of what the aim is, or what we're trying to get towards. And that could be basically by them showing me references to music that they want their music to sound like, or just by giving me just a visual image of what they want it to represent. You know, they'll tell me I want it to feel like I'm standing in the open, you know, and it's a cold day. And then I try to take that information and then translate that into audio as best I can, reflecting their initial concept of the project. But it's pretty critical that you have that you get along with the person you're dealing with, because if not, it's very, very hard to get any kind of good productivity happening if there's any kind of like resistance or like bad feelings between you and the artist.
For sure. Do you have any tips for maintaining good vibes?
Generally, the room that you're operating in or the studio that you're working out of, that can play a huge part, because the environment in which you sit and work can have a huge impact on people who are, coming to you for the first time, and even people that may never have been in like a home studio setup or even any kind of studio setup. So it's important that the artist feels very comfortable when they come in for the first time, because first impressions really do count when it comes to this sort of thing, I feel. Because
I love that.
At the end of the
That's
day,
amazing.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, the artist is really, they're exposing themselves to you in a way which they wouldn't normally expose themselves to other people, because it's their art, it's their idea. They're generally very sensitive about this sort of thing, and the fact they're conveying that to you in the only way they know how, and then for you to have to take that and then actually bring it into the real world, as audio, that's already challenging enough. So making the artist feel comfortable, ensuring that you're clean, organized. I have an aromatherapy candle in the room. I have like some high quality essential oils going. The place is like the lighting's not too bright. I've got some nice colorful mood lighting and stuff like that. The point is the room is pretty cozy and pretty warm. And 9 times out of 10, the people that come around, they say, "Oh, I love it here. It's so cozy. It's like really chilled," and that's great.
Just for the audience members who can't see this conversation happening, I'm talking to Freddie on the Skype, and he's sitting on this chair that has this like big fuzzy.
That's a sheepskin.
I don't know, like sheepskin on the back, so it looks pretty cozy. So I'm definitely getting those vibes from him.
Yeah. It's simple.
Amazing.
I've got some cute stuffed toys lying around as well, especially on top of the monitors. They're standing guard over those tweeters.
Oh, right. He's got like some like Beanie Babies or something.
Absolutely.
So what do you listen for the first time you hear a song? And that said, do you prefer to hear like a demo or a live performance? How do you go about it?
Normally, ahead of time, I would have had the artist send me any kind of recording, like even a phone recording of the song that they have in mind. Whether or not they're performing an instrument, it can just be singing sometimes. But they'll send me some sort of guide to give me an idea of what they're after. And then based on that, I will then, establish with them in the room that is actually, in fact, what they do want. And they'll probably perform it again for me. But it depends on what it is. It really depends on the nature of the project, because some people, they'll have a chord progression, they'll have a verse and a chorus on guitar, and then they'll say, I want to turn this into a full track, but I don't want it to be an acoustic track. So I have to basically generate the idea from what they've performed for me on an acoustic guitar, even though the end result might not even have acoustic guitar in it. So that's normally what tends to happen is that, they'll perform it once or twice for me, or they'll send me something ahead of time, and then I'll already be armed with enough knowledge to know how to get the project going.
So what will generally like pique your interest?
My interest kind of peak when artists say they want it to have like an organic orchestral type feel, because my favorite type of music is when it's like cinematic film scoring basically. So if the artist wants to include anything like that, then I totally go for it, because I love creating that sort of material. But at the same time, I'm very open to all kinds of new sorts of music. I had an artist who said that they performed a song for me. It was like they performed it on acoustic guitar, and it was pretty straightforward. I could tell what the groove was, but I hadn't managed to pinpoint it in my brain yet, because I hadn't dealt with that sort of genre before. It was bossa nova, and they said they want it to be proper bossa nova. So before I said to them, "Oh yeah, I know everything about," because I really it's like it's not a genre I generally deal with, but I had a good basic knowledge built from my education on bossa nova, and I consulted with some books I have here, as well as referencing for hours online to a lot of bossa nova tracks, and then based on that I was able to then construct the track for the artist, which definitely met their expectations. In fact, it exceeded their expectations in the end. They were very thrilled with the result.
That's amazing. It's a lot of work though to do that kind of stuff,
It is a lot of work, but I can't think of a situation where it wouldn't require a lot of work, because at the end of the day, every little tiny thing is paramount inside of the production. Every decision that you make as a producer has to be something that's going to complement the end result. It's not about throwing stuff together that immediately appeals. It's about finding the things that are in the long term going to actually contribute to the project overall.
Interesting. What you're saying, like a lot of people go with the flow, and it sounds like you have a lot of it's like less going with the flow for you and more deep introspection of what really does this track need.
Yeah, sometimes I will say, okay, I will break out of that mode sometimes. Okay, there are modes when I'll be like, hey, I'll just go with the flow. I'll pull up random sample libraries or some of the stuff from Native Instruments, and we'll just browse through for interesting and weird sounds that would just give it some kind of new dimension.